50,000 years ago, life was harsher than you can imagine. Yet it's in that struggle that the real story of humanity began. Imagine this. 50,000 years ago, what was life really like? No electricity, no cities, no internet. Only the crackling firelight, the silence of vast forests, and the breath of people who hunted, gathered, and struggled every day just to survive. From our modern comfort, it's easy to think of prehistoric humans as primitive, but in reality, they were far more resourceful, adaptable, and intelligent than we give them credit for. Ask yourself, when you wake up today and breakfast is ready, can you picture a time when your ancestors had no guarantee of food, when every single day was a battle between hunger and survival? A wrong step could mean death by wild animals, a failed hunt could mean starvation, and the darkness of night was filled with dangers we can hardly imagine. Yet despite this constant struggle, humans not only survived, they created tools, shared stories, built communities, and laid the foundation for everything we call civilization today. In the chapters ahead, we will explore their food, their homes, their tribes, their fears, and their joys. This isn't just a story about survival, it's the story of how humans learned to shape the world. 50,000 years ago, every sunrise was not a guarantee of comfort, but a warning that survival was never certain, and the very first thought in the minds of prehistoric humans was simple: will we eat today, or will hunger defeat us? Imagine waking up, not to an alarm clock, but to the sound of rustling leaves, a growling stomach, and the possibility that what lurks in the shadows could either be your next meal or your last predator. These people were hunter-gatherers, which meant life was a constant race between catching food and avoiding death. Men, women, and children all had roles to play, while hunters tracked wild animals across open plains with nothing but sharpened stone-tipped spears. Women and children combed the forests for berries, roots, and nuts, their eyes trained to distinguish between what could nourish the tribe and what could poison them. And yet, think about the brilliance required. They had no books, no written guides, no maps, but they knew migration patterns, animal tracks, and plant species better than we know the apps on our phones today. Isn't it fascinating that despite all the danger, they developed strategies, teamwork, and unspoken communication, like hand signals during a hunt, because one wrong sound could send prey fleeing or predators charging? But here's the question. If survival was this brutal, how did they find time for art, rituals, and imagination? Stay tuned, because later we'll explore how these so-called primitive people were actually the first storytellers and dreamers. For now, picture a group of hunters waiting hours in the tall grass, their bodies painted with mud for camouflage, their hearts racing as a herd approaches. A single spear thrown true could feed the group for days, but failure could mean starvation. Meanwhile, back at camp, gatherers carefully dug roots with wooden sticks, passing down knowledge of the land from one generation to the next, because one mistake in choosing a toxic plant could wipe out the entire tribe. Isn't it incredible how much depended on memory, experience, and teaching? And this raises another question. If food was so uncertain, how did early humans divide resources, and did everyone get an equal share? That's something we'll uncover in the next chapter when we dive into their community life and social bonds. So don't go anywhere, because the story of survival isn't just about hunting and eating. It's about the birth of cooperation, trust, and even early forms of leadership. If survival was the daily struggle of prehistoric humans, then community was the shield that made survival possible, because no single man or woman could fight hunger, predators, and the cold alone. Imagine a small group of 20 to 30 people huddled around a fire, not just for warmth, but for safety. Each person's role vital to the group's survival. The hunters brought meat, the gatherers supplied plants and fruits, the elders shared knowledge, and the children learned by watching. But here's the fascinating question. How did they decide who got the largest portion of food or who would risk their lives in the hunt? Stay tuned, because this is where the first unwritten rules of humanity began to form. Prehistoric communities were not chaotic mobs. They developed systems of sharing and fairness, because greed could mean disaster for the whole group. Isn't it remarkable that before laws, before kings, before written codes, humans instinctively practiced cooperation? Food was often divided equally, yet those who proved their bravery in the hunt or wisdom in guiding the group earned respect, trust, and sometimes authority. And think about this. Leadership back then wasn't about crowns or thrones. It was about survival credibility. People followed the one who could keep them alive. Around the fire, stories were told, not just entertainment, but vital lessons disguised as tales of spirits, animals, and ancestors. Imagine being a child and hearing around the flames how your people once outsmarted a lion or how certain plants healed wounds. Those stories weren't fantasy. They were survival manuals passed down orally. But what does this tell us? That humans were not just surviving, they were building culture. Stay tuned, because later we'll uncover how those simple stories evolved into myths, religions, and eventually the foundations of civilization. Yet community life wasn't only about survival, it was also about emotion. Imagine the comfort of belonging to a group where others protected you, where laughter and sorrow were shared, where bonds of kinship and friendship were as strong as the spears they carried. Isn't it interesting that love, jealousy, rivalry, and compassion existed long before cities or nations? But here's another question. If they lived in such small groups, how did different tribes interact? Were strangers seen as friends, enemies, or threats? In the chapters ahead, we'll explore how early humans encountered each other, how they traded, fought, or even merged, and how these interactions shaped the human journey. For now, understand this. Without community, humans would never have survived the harsh realities of 50,000 years ago. And without those early rules of sharing and leadership, society as we know it would never have been born. If community gave prehistoric humans strength, then fear reminded them every single day just how fragile that strength was. Imagine walking out of your shelter at dawn, the sky still gray, mist crawling across the ground, and every sound in the distance carrying a deadly possibility. Was that rustle in the bushes a harmless bird, or was it the silent approach of a predator with eyes fixed on you? This was life 50,000 years ago. No locked doors, no secure walls, only a thin line of courage and instinct separating survival from death. Wolves, lions, saber-toothed cats, massive bears. These weren't stories or legends, they were daily realities. And here's the question. How did humans so small and weak compared to these beasts manage to survive? Stay tuned, because the answer lies not in physical strength, but in intelligence. Humans learned to transform fear into strategy, using fire not just for warmth, but as a weapon. Imagine flames crackling at the edge of camp, keeping the night predators at bay. But fire was not always enough. Early humans created traps, sharpened spears, and worked in teams, proving that cooperation was their most powerful defense. Isn't it fascinating that fear, instead of paralyzing them, became a force that pushed them to invent, adapt, and grow? Yet danger didn't come only from predators. Nature itself was unpredictable and cruel. A sudden storm could drench fires and freeze entire groups overnight. A drought could wipe out plants and force humans to wander for weeks in search of food. A river crossing could sweep away children and hunters alike. Think about it. How do you keep moving, keep hoping, when the world itself feels like it wants you gone? But humans endured, and they endured because they shared responsibility, elders teaching survival tricks, women carrying children while still gathering roots, men scouting ahead for safe ground, each member of the tribe playing a role in beating back the chaos of nature. And here's where it gets interesting. Danger also shaped their minds. The constant threat of death gave birth to rituals and beliefs. Imagine sitting by the fire at night, hearing the howls of wolves, and believing that spirits guarded you or cursed you. Isn't it remarkable that fear created the earliest seeds of religion, giving people the courage to face what they could not control? Stay tuned, because in the next chapter we'll explore how these fears evolved into spiritual systems, art, and imagination that changed humanity forever. But before that, pause and ask yourself, could you have survived a single week in that world without walls, without weapons of steel, without supermarkets or hospitals? They did it not for a week, not for a year, but for generation after generation, building a legacy of resilience that lives inside us even today. And isn't that the greatest twist of all, that the fears that haunted them thousands of years ago are the very reason we exist at all? We've seen how prehistoric humans fought hunger, built communities, and faced danger. But here comes the most astonishing part. Even in a world where every day was a battle for survival, they still found time to dream, to create, to imagine. Isn't that incredible? Imagine walking into a dark cave 50,000 years ago, torchlight flickering on the walls, and suddenly you see painted figures of animals, handprints, and mysterious symbols. Proof that humans weren't just surviving, they were expressing themselves, leaving messages across time. Why would someone who struggled daily against hunger spend hours painting a bison or carving shapes into bone? The answer is simple, yet powerful. Humans needed meaning as much as they needed food. These early artworks were more than decoration. They were tools of teaching, memory, and spirituality. A child looking at a painting of a successful hunt wasn't just staring at art. They were learning, imagining, preparing. And here's the fascinating question. Could it be that imagination was the true weapon that gave humans the edge over all other species? Stay tuned, because we'll dive even deeper. Alongside art came music and rhythm, stone flutes, bone whistles, drums made of stretched animal skin. Picture a circle of people dancing around fire, stamping their feet in unison, chanting stories of their ancestors. Doesn't it sound familiar, like the concerts and festivals we attend today? The roots of our music, our storytelling, our celebrations, all of them stretch back to those ancient nights. But art and music were not just about joy. They were also about fear and hope. Early humans believed spirits lived in the animals, in the sky, in the fire, and rituals were their way of asking for protection or good fortune. Imagine the trembling silence as a shaman raised a carved bone, whispering chants before a dangerous hunt, giving the tribe courage. Isn't it remarkable that belief gave them strength when nothing else could? This is the dawn of religion, of philosophy, of asking the questions that even today we struggle to answer. Who are we? Why are we here? What happens after death? Stay tuned, because these questions are the very foundation of civilization itself. And speaking of civilization, think of the chain reaction. The moment humans began creating, imagining, and sharing knowledge, they separated themselves forever from other animals. Fire was not just warmth, it was community. Tools were not just weapons, they were extensions of the human mind. Art was not just drawing, it was memory preserved. Belief was not just ritual, it was comfort against the unknown. From these seeds grew agriculture, villages, cities, and eventually the modern world we live in. 50,000 years ago marked not only the daily struggle for food, safety, and shelter, but also the moment when humanity embarked on its most daring adventure, the Great Migration across the planet, a journey that would eventually shape the destiny of every human alive today. Imagine a small band of people, no more than 20 or 30 individuals, leaving behind the warm savannas of Africa, their ancestral homeland, and stepping into a world of endless uncertainty. There were no maps, no guides, no guarantees, only questions that filled the horizon. What lies beyond those mountains? Where does the river end? Will the land ahead feed us or kill us? Isn't it astonishing to think that without cities, without compasses, without even written words, they became the first explorers of Earth? Stay tuned, because this chapter is the turning point of our story. Each step was an act of bravery and desperation. They walked across scorching deserts, through jungles buzzing with unknown dangers, and into frozen landscapes where the cold cut sharper than any predator's teeth. Picture their children crying from hunger, their elders struggling to keep pace, their hunters scanning for tracks in alien soil. Every mile was a gamble, but turning back was not an option, because survival demanded movement and curiosity demanded discovery. And here's what makes it more remarkable. As they spread into new environments, they adapted in ways that still echo in us today. In icy Europe, humans learned to stitch thick furs with bone needles, inventing clothing to outsmart the cold. In the dense forests of Asia, they sharpened tools to cut and carve their way through green labyrinths. In the dry deserts of the Middle East, they learned to conserve water, traveling at night and resting in shade. Isn't it incredible how quickly weakness turned into innovation? But migration wasn't just about geography, it was also about identity. As small groups separated and settled in different lands, they developed distinct customs, accents, rituals, and myths. Imagine the first encounters between two tribes who had never seen each other before. Strange faces, strange languages, but the same hunger and the same fire in their eyes. Were they friends? Were they enemies? Did they trade shells and stone tools, or did they clash over territory and water? Stay tuned, because in later millennia, these encounters would give rise to alliances, wars, and exchanges that shaped civilizations. And as they traveled, they carried more than just tools. They carried imagination. In caves in Europe, they painted animals so lifelike that even today, the images feel alive. In Asia, they carved intricate figurines from bone and ivory, perhaps as symbols of luck or protection. In Australia, they created some of the world's oldest rock art, mapping their relationship with land and spirit. Isn't it breathtaking to realize that wherever humans went, they left behind not just footprints, but echoes of creativity? These were not just marks on stone. They were statements that said, "We were here, we dreamed, we mattered." And think about this. When humans migrated, they also carried stories, beliefs, and songs. Sitting around campfires, they retold tales of hunts, storms, and spirits, turning survival into memory and memory into culture. Isn't it possible that these stories, passed down for thousands of years, are the ancestors of the myths, religions, and histories we know today? Stay tuned, because in the next era of humanity, those sparks of imagination would ignite the fires of civilization. Yet, beneath all this creativity, the migration was still brutally difficult. Some groups vanished entirely, leaving only scattered bones as a reminder of failed journeys. Others merged with new tribes, exchanging knowledge and even interbreeding with other human species like Neanderthals, leaving traces in our DNA that we still carry. Pause for a moment and consider that inside your body, in your very blood, are fragments of those ancient unions, whispers of encounters that happened tens of thousands of years ago. Isn't that mind-blowing? And here lies the greatest irony. While they were small in number, fragile in body, and always at risk of extinction, their courage to keep moving ensured the survival of humanity itself. They had no idea that their footsteps were writing the first chapter of global history, that every path they walked would one day lead to cities, nations, and a world connected by billions of people. So let me ask you, if they had the courage to step into unknown forests, cross freezing mountains, and face endless horizons without any promise of safety, what excuse do we have today not to explore our own unknowns, our dreams, our challenges, our future? Because isn't that the real lesson of 50,000 years ago? That humanity is defined not by fear of the dark, but by the bravery to walk into it? Stay tuned, because their journey never truly ended. Every ship that sailed an ocean, every rocket that left Earth, every discovery that pushed beyond the horizon is just a continuation of the same fire that burned in those first travelers. They were not simply surviving, they were beginning a legacy of exploration that still drives us forward today. And perhaps that's the greatest truth of all. The story of humanity is not about where we stayed, it's about how far we dared to go. But pause and ask yourself, if you could sit for just one evening beside the fire of your ancestors, listening to their stories, watching their dances, hearing the crackle of the flames against the vast silence of the wild, what would you feel? Fear, amazement, or perhaps the strange realization that despite 50,000 years of distance, you are not so different from them after all. Because isn't it true that even today, we gather in groups, we share meals, we tell stories, we sing, we pray, and we dream. The world around us has changed, but the heart of humanity has not. And that is the real lesson of prehistory. Survival made us strong, community made us safe, fear made us inventive, and imagination made us human. Without those cave fires, those first songs, those first painted walls, we would not be here. So stay tuned, because this journey into the past is not just about looking back. It's about seeing where we come from and understanding that the spirit of those early humans still burns inside us, guiding us forward into the future. So now you've traveled back 50,000 years into a world that was as dangerous as it was awe-inspiring. We've seen how hunger shaped the daily struggle, how community created the first rules of sharing and leadership, how fear became both a threat and a teacher, and finally how imagination and creativity transformed survival into culture. Isn't it extraordinary that people with no technology, no cities, and no written language still laid the foundation for everything we call human today? They were not just survivors, they were innovators, dreamers, and storytellers. Think about it. Without their fire, there would be no electricity. Without their stories, no books or films. Without their rituals, no religions or philosophies. Every single comfort we enjoy today traces back to those men and women who once sat in the flickering glow of a fire, staring into the unknown, and daring to dream beyond survival. And here's the most important lesson. Their story is not just history, it's our story. The courage, the creativity, the resilience that kept them alive still lives within us. So the next time you flip a switch, stream a song, or share a meal with friends, remember, you are carrying forward the legacy of people who, against impossible odds, imagined a future. And isn't that what being human has always been about? Dreaming of tomorrow, even in the harshest of todays. Stay tuned, because the story of humanity doesn't end here.